She had been planning this trip for weeks, and the excitement of finally boarding the plane made her heart race. Her bag was snugly tucked under the seat, and she carefully settled into her spot by the window, letting out a small sigh of relief. It had been a long week at work, and she had been looking forward to a break, a moment to breathe and let go of all the stress. The plane was full, and the hum of passengers chatting and flight attendants moving up and down the aisle filled the cabin. Everyone seemed busy with their own thoughts, but she could not shake the slight nervous feeling that had started when she first stepped onto the aircraft. She tried to ignore it, focusing instead on the view outside the small window. The sun was just beginning to dip below the horizon, painting the clouds in shades of orange and pink. She always found the sight calming, a reminder that the world was bigger than any problem that could weigh her down. She took a deep breath, trying to settle into a sense of peace. But just as she began to relax, a voice came over the intercom, cutting through the quiet chatter of passengers. The pilot's voice was calm but carried a sharp edge that made her stomach tighten. He began to address her directly, a few words that immediately made her skin crawl. He questioned why she was sitting in that particular seat, suggesting she might be in the wrong place. For a moment she froze, unsure how to respond. The entire cabin seemed to hold its breath. People turned their heads, curious and uneasy, sensing that something unusual was happening. She could feel their eyes on her, a mixture of curiosity, sympathy, and discomfort. She looked around and noticed the subtle glances of fellow passengers. Some avoided eye contact entirely, pretending nothing was happening. Others whispered to the people next to them, voices hushed but clearly discussing the situation. She felt a flush of embarrassment and anger, but she forced herself to stay composed. She had faced discrimination before, but this public confrontation was new and unsettling. Yet deep down she knew that showing fear or frustration would not help. She had to remain calm and collected, even if her heart was pounding in her chest. The pilot continued, his words tinged with condescension. He suggested she might not belong in that section of the plane, hinting at a judgment that had nothing to do with her ticket or behavior. She could feel the weight of the implication, heavy and unfair. It was not just about the seat anymore. It was about her identity, something she could not change, something that had been used against her far too many times before. She pressed her lips together, reminding herself to breathe slowly. She would not let him see her falter. As the plane began to taxi, the murmurs in the cabin grew louder. Some passengers seemed unsure how to react, while others exchanged sympathetic looks with her. She caught the eye of a woman a few rows ahead who gave a subtle nod of encouragement. It was a small gesture, but it helped her regain a fraction of her strength. She realized she was not entirely alone, that there were people around her who recognized the injustice and felt it too. The pilot's voice faded as the plane lifted off, but the tension did not. She sat upright, trying to focus on something tangible. She took out a small notebook from her bag, something she used to jot down thoughts and ideas during her travels. Her hand hovered over the page, unsure what to write. Writing had always helped her process difficult moments, and she hoped it would do the same now. She scribbled a few words about the sky, the sunset, and the strange mix of fear and determination she felt. The flight attendants moved past her, offering drinks and snacks. She smiled politely, their presence a small comfort in the midst of the lingering tension. She noticed one of them giving a quick, understanding glance, a silent acknowledgement that they had seen what had happened. That tiny moment of human connection helped her feel a little steadier. She realized that even in the midst of public humiliation, there could be allies, even if unspoken, who quietly supported her. As the plane leveled off, she allowed herself a moment to reflect. She thought about her life, the experiences that had shaped her, the challenges she had overcome. She thought about her family, friends, and the community that had always encouraged her to stand tall. She reminded herself that her worth was not determined by the words of someone trying to belittle her. She had always believed in the power of dignity and composure, and she knew that these values would guide her through the situation. She also thought about the power of choice. At that moment, she could either let the humiliation take root or transform it into a moment of strength. She chose the latter, silently making a promise to herself that she would respond in a way that reflected her true character. She would not allow anger or embarrassment to dictate her actions. Instead, she would act with intention, with thoughtfulness, and with courage. The flight continued, and she began to notice small details that helped her regain a sense of normalcy. The soft hum of the engines, the distant laughter of children, the rustle of pages from a fellow passenger reading a book. All these ordinary sounds reminded her that life continued, that this moment, while significant, was not the entirety of her story. She focused on the rhythm of the plane, the gentle sway as it moved through the clouds, and let herself feel a sense of quiet determination building inside. Minutes turned into an hour, and the initial shock of the pilot's words began to settle into a steady resolve. She realized that she had already taken the first step in reclaiming her power, simply by remaining composed and thoughtful. The people around her, those silent witnesses, were starting to sense her strength. Some looked at her with admiration, others with curiosity, but all were beginning to see that she would not be easily shaken. She leaned back slightly in her seat, closing her eyes for a brief moment. She visualized what she would say if the moment came for her to respond. Her mind raced through different scenarios, but she kept returning to a single principle: clarity and dignity. She would speak calmly, assertively, and with a sharp awareness of what was right and fair. She would not be drawn into anger or panic. Instead, she would rise above the attempt to shame her. The cabin slowly settled into a rhythm, the initial tension beginning to fade. Yet she remained alert, aware that the challenge was not over. She could still feel the weight of the pilot's judgment, the lingering eyes of some passengers, and the unspoken question of whether she would act or remain silent. She knew that how she handled the coming moments could leave a lasting impression, not just on the people around her, but on herself as well. She took a deep breath, feeling a renewed sense of purpose. She reminded herself that courage was not the absence of fear, but the decision to act in spite of it. She was ready to face whatever came next with grace, intelligence, and resilience. The journey had begun, and though it had taken an unexpected turn, she felt a quiet confidence growing within her. She knew that this flight, which had started with humiliation, could become a moment of empowerment, a story she could tell with pride in the days to come. The plane had leveled off, and the steady hum of the engines created a sense of routine, but inside her the unease still lingered. She could feel the weight of every eye in the cabin on her, and though some passengers had returned to their reading or phones, others watched her closely, whispering quietly to each other. It was as if the pilot's words had created an invisible line in the cabin, dividing the passengers into observers and witnesses. She felt the pressure of being the center of attention, not in the way anyone wants, but because circumstances forced it upon her. She thought about what had just happened and how quickly the situation had escalated. One moment she was settling into her seat, hoping for a calm flight, and the next she was publicly questioned and judged for something that had nothing to do with her actions. Her mind raced with questions about why it had happened and how she would respond. She reminded herself to breathe slow and steady, letting the panic that threatened to rise fade into clarity. She knew that staying composed was her first victory. As she glanced around, she noticed the pilot occasionally watching the cabin through the small window in the cockpit door. There was a sense of authority in the way he moved, a subtle reminder that he was in control of the plane and the situation. But she also saw uncertainty in his stance, a flicker of hesitation that she quietly noted. It gave her a sense of cautious hope that perhaps he had underestimated her, thinking she would crumble or remain silent. Passengers began to shift uncomfortably in their seats. Some turned to their companions, exchanging whispered comments about the strange situation unfolding before them. A few stared straight ahead, pretending not to notice, while others cast sympathetic glances her way. She caught the eye of a man a few rows back who gave a small nod of encouragement, and she returned it with a quiet, almost imperceptible smile. These small silent signals reminded her that she was not entirely alone, even though it felt that way. She reflected on other times she had faced unfair treatment, times when words or actions tried to diminish her worth. Each memory brought a pang of frustration, but also a sense of strength. She realized that each challenge she had overcome had prepared her for moments like this. She had learned to remain composed, to think carefully before reacting, and to choose her words and actions with intention. She reminded herself that her response now could set the tone for everything that followed on this flight. As the plane cruised, she quietly observed the interactions of those around her. Some passengers had started to relax, believing the situation had passed, while others remained tense, sensing the tension that lingered like a thick cloud in the cabin. She noticed a young woman a few rows ahead glancing nervously toward her, her expression a mixture of curiosity and concern. It occurred to her that her reaction could influence not just the pilot, but also the passengers, shaping the way they perceived justice and courage. She thought about how she would respond if the pilot or a flight attendant approached her again, with the same condescending tone. She visualized herself speaking clearly, calmly, and assertively. She would not shout or accuse, but she would make it clear that the behavior was unacceptable. Her words needed to reflect not just her own dignity, but also the principle that no one should be shamed or judged unfairly. She rehearsed in her mind, weighing every phrase and pause, imagining the impact it could have. The flight attendants passed by once more, offering drinks and snacks. She took a small sip of water, letting it ground her. One attendant offered a subtle, supportive smile, and she returned it with a quiet nod. The small acts of kindness reminded her that while the situation was challenging, there were still people who saw her for who she was, and not the label someone else tried to place on her. She felt a flicker of reassurance, a reminder that she could navigate this moment with composure and intelligence. Her thoughts wandered to the broader implications of the incident. She considered how public humiliation could affect someone's confidence and sense of self-worth. She understood how easily fear and anger could take over in moments like this, leading to reactions that might escalate the situation. She was determined not to allow that to happen. She wanted her response to be measured, thoughtful, and impactful, showing that strength could be calm and deliberate. The pilot's occasional glances from the cockpit reminded her that he was aware of her presence and her composure. She felt a quiet determination building inside her. She knew that this was more than a personal confrontation. It was a moment that could influence everyone watching. By responding with dignity, she could shift the energy in the cabin, perhaps even challenge the assumptions that had led to this unfair situation in the first place. She thought about her family, the values they had instilled in her, and the lessons she had learned from them. They had taught her to stand up for herself without losing her sense of respect and integrity. She drew strength from those memories, letting them guide her as she prepared for whatever might come next. She reminded herself that courage was not the absence of fear, but the decision to act in spite of it. The passengers began to settle into a quiet hum of conversation again, but she could still feel the tension lingering. She realized that she had a choice in how she perceived the situation, as a source of fear and shame, or as an opportunity to demonstrate strength and dignity. She chose the latter, letting a sense of calm determination wash over her. She would not allow the pilot's words to define her experience. Instead, she would use the moment to assert her presence and her worth. As the flight continued, she observed the subtle reactions of those around her. Some passengers began to seem more attentive, as if they sensed that she might respond in a way that mattered. She noticed a few passengers discreetly recording small snippets of the flight on their phones. Their curiosity piqued. While she did not focus on them, she recognized that the unfolding situation had drawn attention beyond the immediate tension, hinting that her actions could reach far beyond the plane itself. She allowed herself a brief moment of reflection. Thinking about the strength it took to remain calm under pressure, she realized that composure was not passive. It required constant attention and effort. She felt proud of herself for maintaining control, even as her pulse raced. She understood that the coming moments would test her resolve further, but she felt ready. She had practiced mindfulness, internal focus, and careful thought, and now it was time to put all of that into action. Her thoughts also turned to the notion of fairness and justice. She knew that the pilot's actions were unfair, not just to her but as an example of a broader issue that many faced. She understood the importance of responding in a way that upheld fairness, showing that discrimination could be confronted calmly and effectively. Her resolve strengthened as she considered the potential ripple effect of her actions, influencing not just this flight, but the perception of others who witnessed it. The quiet hum of the cabin, the soft rustling of papers, and the distant sound of children laughing served as a gentle reminder that life moved forward, even in moments of conflict. She focused on the rhythm of the plane, letting it center her thoughts and steady her nerves. She felt a growing clarity, a sense that she could turn this uncomfortable moment into one of empowerment. She would not react impulsively or let the shame linger. She would take control of her response with thoughtfulness and poise. Minutes passed, and the pilot's occasional announcements over the intercom reminded her of his presence and authority. She realized that she could not predict how he might act next, but she could control her own behavior. She had the power to define her own experience and to influence how the situation unfolded. With every passing moment, her confidence grew. She felt a quiet strength building inside her, a readiness to meet the challenge head-on. She reviewed her options internally, considering different ways to assert herself without causing unnecessary conflict. She knew that her goal was not to embarrass the pilot or escalate the situation, but to stand firm, calmly, and clearly. She understood the power of words, of measured speech, and of a composed demeanor. She reminded herself that her actions in the next moments could leave a lasting impression, not just on the pilot, but on the passengers, and even herself. The flight continued to hum along smoothly, and she began to feel a subtle shift in her perception. The initial shock and humiliation were transforming into determination and clarity. She felt ready to engage with the situation fully, knowing that she could respond in a way that upheld her dignity and made a difference. She allowed herself to feel a sense of empowerment, a quiet but steady confidence that she could handle whatever came next with grace and intelligence. She glanced around one last time, noticing passengers who had been quietly observing her. Sensing that something significant might happen, she felt a connection with them, even if silent, as they collectively awaited the next development. She knew that this moment was not just about her. It was about showing courage, fairness, and strength in the face of discrimination. She felt a sense of purpose, a quiet resolve that would guide her through the next stage of this flight. The tension in the cabin remained, a quiet hum of anticipation as she prepared herself. Her hands rested on her lap, but her mind was racing, planning carefully how she would respond if the pilot addressed her again. She had spent the last hour observing, listening, and gathering her thoughts. Every whisper, every glance, every subtle reaction of the passengers became part of her understanding. She realized she had an audience, and more than that, she had an opportunity to show courage, dignity, and intelligence in a moment that could easily have been humiliating. She remembered the lessons she had learned from her life experiences. Patience, clarity, and calmness had always served her well. She understood that a strong response did not mean shouting or losing control. It meant choosing the right words, speaking with intention, and holding her presence confidently. She reminded herself that the way she carried herself would speak louder than any reaction fueled by emotion. The pilot had tried to shame her, but he had not counted on her composure or her determination. As the plane continued its steady course through the sky, the pilot's voice came over the intercom once more. This time his tone was slightly sharper, as if testing her patience, trying to see if she would falter. He repeated the insinuation, suggesting again that she might not belong in that section of the plane. She felt a flicker of anger, but she did not let it take hold. She breathed deeply, letting the feeling pass, and focused on her response. She knew she had to speak, not with aggression, but with clear authority. She stood slowly, making sure her movements were calm and deliberate. The passengers' eyes followed her, some with surprise, others with curiosity. She began to speak, her voice steady and clear, addressing the pilot directly. She pointed out that she had a valid ticket for her seat, and that his comments were not only unnecessary but unfair. She spoke in a way that was calm but firm, not allowing room for interruption or deflection. Her words carried the weight of reason, and the passengers leaned in slightly, sensing the significance of her response. The pilot's momentary pause showed that he had not expected her to respond with such confidence. She continued, explaining that public shaming was inappropriate and that she deserved respect like any other passenger. Her tone remained even, without accusation or insult, but full of clarity and conviction. She could feel a shift in the cabin. Whispers turned into attentive silence as passengers absorbed what she was saying. Her courage had begun to influence the atmosphere, turning tension into respect. She noticed subtle reactions among the passengers. Some nodded quietly in agreement, others exchanged glances of admiration. She realized that she was no longer just defending herself. She was demonstrating dignity and courage in a way that could inspire others. The pilot, faced with her unwavering calm, seemed momentarily taken aback. He tried to respond, but she remained composed, allowing him no opportunity to belittle her further. Her restraint and clarity were disarming, and it became clear that he had underestimated her. As she spoke, she reflected on the larger message of her actions. This was more than a personal confrontation. It was about standing up against unfair treatment and showing that courage could be expressed through calm, intelligent words rather than anger. She thought about the countless people who might face similar situations and how her response could set an example. By remaining composed, she was showing that dignity was a form of strength that could not be shaken by intimidation. Her confidence grew as she continued, and she realized that the moment of fear and humiliation had transformed into a moment of empowerment. She had taken control, and the energy in the cabin reflected that change. Passengers who had been uncertain now seemed engaged, quietly acknowledging her bravery. Some even began to take out their phones discreetly, recording her composed response. While she did not focus on them, she understood that her actions could reach far beyond this plane, that her courage could ripple outward in ways she had not yet imagined. The flight attendants moved through the aisle again, their expressions a mixture of professionalism and subtle admiration. One gave her a small, encouraging smile, a reminder that her composure had been noticed. She felt a quiet sense of validation, knowing that even small gestures of recognition could reinforce the power of standing firm in the face of adversity. She allowed herself a moment to breathe and regain her focus, readying herself for any further interaction with the pilot. She thought about the importance of remaining composed even when the other person tried to provoke a reaction. The pilot had attempted to humiliate her, but he had failed because she refused to engage in anger or fear. She understood that true strength lay in maintaining dignity, even under pressure. She felt a deep sense of satisfaction, knowing that she had turned a potential moment of shame into one of empowerment, demonstrating that courage could take many forms. Passengers began to react subtly to her words and actions. Some whispered to one another, clearly impressed by the way she had handled the situation. Others watched quietly, absorbing the lesson of calm authority she was presenting. She realized that she was influencing the environment around her, not through confrontation, but through presence and integrity. The pilot, confronted by her unwavering composure, seemed increasingly uncomfortable, realizing that his attempt to shame her had failed. She continued to speak with clarity, articulating her position without hesitation. She emphasized that respect and fairness should be universal, and that public humiliation was unacceptable. Her voice was steady, her words carefully chosen to convey authority without aggression. She noticed the subtle nods of agreement from passengers and felt a sense of solidarity forming in the cabin. It was a quiet, powerful moment, as people began to recognize the injustice and the courage with which she had confronted it. The pilot attempted to interject, but she maintained control of the conversation, allowing him only to speak when she had finished her points. Her ability to manage the interaction with calm precision left a visible impression. The energy in the cabin had shifted. The fear and tension that had marked the earlier part of the flight were replaced with respect and acknowledgement of her strength. She felt a quiet pride, knowing that she had successfully navigated a difficult and potentially humiliating situation. She reflected on the broader significance of her actions. This was more than just a personal victory. It was an example of how one person's courage and composure could influence others, inspire confidence, and challenge unfair behavior. She thought about how many people might carry similar experiences of discrimination, and how witnessing her response could provide hope and encouragement. She understood that courage did not always need to be loud or confrontational. Sometimes the quiet, steady assertion of dignity was more powerful. As the flight continued, she allowed herself a moment to feel the transformation within herself. What had started as fear and humiliation had evolved into empowerment and clarity. She had faced a challenge that tested her resolve and had emerged with strength and composure. She understood that this experience would stay with her, shaping her confidence and reinforcing her belief in the power of calm courage. She also thought about the pilot and the lessons he might take from this encounter. While his actions had been intended to shame her, her response had demonstrated that intimidation and condescension could be met with dignity and intelligence. She felt a sense of quiet hope that her actions might encourage reflection, not just among passengers but among those who had tried to assert power unfairly. She understood that change often started with small, courageous acts. As the cabin settled into a quieter rhythm, she felt a renewed sense of purpose. The moment of confrontation had passed, but the impact of her response was already evident. Passengers who had been uneasy now seemed more relaxed, some offering subtle nods of respect. She allowed herself to acknowledge the power of her own composure, the clarity of her thoughts, and the courage it took to act with integrity. She had turned a moment of potential shame into one of empowerment and influence. She took a deep breath, Feeling the satisfaction of having faced the situation head-on, she knew that she had set a standard for how to handle unfair treatment with grace and strength. The flight continued, and she remained poised, aware that the challenge might not be entirely over, but confident in her ability to navigate whatever came next. The cabin had shifted not because of confrontation, but because of calm courage and the quiet assertion of dignity. As she settled back into her seat, she allowed herself a brief moment of reflection. She thought about the strength she had demonstrated and the impact her response might have on others. She realized that courage could take many forms, and sometimes the most powerful form was calm, steady, and deliberate. She had reclaimed control of the situation, and in doing so she had shown that dignity and intelligence could triumph over intimidation and unfair treatment. The moment had changed her, leaving her with a sense of empowerment that would carry her forward. Long after the flight had ended, after the pilot's attempts to intimidate her failed, the atmosphere in the cabin began to shift noticeably. What had started as a tense and awkward situation slowly transformed into quiet admiration and curiosity. Passengers who had been whispering and observing in fear or uncertainty now seemed engaged, paying close attention to her composure. She realized that her calm, thoughtful response had created ripples far beyond what she could have imagined. The sense of being powerless had completely disappeared, replaced by an empowering clarity and quiet authority. She sat back slightly, letting herself absorb the change in energy. The plane hummed steadily through the sky, but now the cabin felt lighter. Some passengers gave subtle nods of respect, while others quietly murmured words of encouragement to one another. A few even discreetly recorded small parts of the exchange, capturing the dignity and courage she had displayed. She did not focus on the cameras or phones. Instead, she concentrated on maintaining her calm and steady presence. She understood that the lesson of this moment was not about recognition, but about resilience and courage in the face of unfair treatment. Word of her response spread quickly among the passengers. A few people leaned over to whisper encouragement, or to tell her that she had handled the situation remarkably well. Their words were simple, but they carried warmth and affirmation, reminding her that even small gestures could have a significant impact. She smiled quietly in appreciation, letting herself feel a small sense of satisfaction. It was a rare moment when she could see the tangible effects of her actions, and it filled her with a sense of empowerment she had not felt at the beginning of the flight. She thought about the pilot and how her response might have affected him. The man who had tried to publicly shame her now seemed uncertain, even a little defensive, as if he were realizing that his authority could not silence or diminish her. She did not feel anger or hatred toward him. Instead, she felt a quiet sense of victory in knowing that she had reclaimed her power with dignity. She understood that confronting someone who tries to belittle you was not always about confrontation. Sometimes it was about showing strength, clarity, and calm authority. As the flight continued, she noticed other passengers beginning to interact differently. Conversations started to resume, but now they were filled with acknowledgement and admiration for what had just occurred. People whispered quietly, pointing out the courage and intelligence she had displayed. Even those who had not directly witnessed the exchange seemed to sense the shift in energy. She realized that standing firm with dignity could create a ripple effect, subtly influencing the attitudes and thoughts of those around her. She allowed herself a moment to reflect on the journey that had led her to this point. She thought about her past experiences, the times she had faced discrimination or unfair treatment, and how each challenge had shaped her resilience. She remembered the lessons she had learned about patience, composure, and thoughtful action. She understood that the current moment, though intense, was part of a larger narrative of strength and self-respect. By remaining composed and responding intelligently, she had turned an uncomfortable situation into an empowering experience. Her thoughts also turned to the potential impact of her actions beyond the flight. She knew that in the age of social media and instant sharing, her response could reach far beyond the cabin walls. People might see her actions as a model for how to confront unfair treatment calmly and effectively. She felt a sense of responsibility, realizing that courage was not just about defending oneself but also about inspiring others to stand tall in the face of adversity. She understood that this moment could become a story of empowerment for many who had faced similar challenges. She noticed the subtle gestures of support from the flight attendants. One offered a quiet smile of recognition, while another made a discreet nod in her direction. These small acknowledgments reminded her that even in moments of conflict, Human connection could provide reassurance and solidarity. She felt a sense of shared understanding with those around her, a recognition that dignity and respect mattered to more people than she had initially realized. It was a comforting thought, reinforcing her sense of purpose and resolve. The pilot remained somewhat silent, occasionally issuing brief announcements over the intercom, but the tone had shifted. There was less of the previous condescension, and more of a restrained formality. She understood that her composed and clear response had challenged his behavior in a way that he could not easily counter. It was a quiet triumph, a demonstration that power and authority do not always guarantee control, especially when met with intelligence, poise, and dignity. She began to think about the lessons this moment might carry into her own life beyond the flight. She realized that courage was not about grand gestures, but about small, deliberate choices made in difficult circumstances. By responding thoughtfully and calmly, she had not only defended herself but also demonstrated a model of behavior that could influence others. She felt a renewed sense of confidence, understanding that her strength came not just from her actions, but from the values she carried within her. Passengers began to settle more comfortably in their seats, some quietly discussing the incident among themselves. She could feel a subtle sense of admiration radiating through the cabin. People seemed to recognize the courage it took to face public shaming with dignity. Even those who had initially looked away now seemed to understand the significance of her response. She allowed herself to feel the weight of that influence, a quiet satisfaction that her actions had created a positive shift in her environment. She thought about the broader implications of the incident. Many people faced moments of unfair treatment or discrimination, moments where they felt powerless or silenced. She realized that by standing firm and responding with intelligence and calm authority, she had provided an example that could resonate far beyond this single flight. It was a reminder that courage and dignity could create ripple effects, influencing not only immediate observers but also those who might later hear or see the story. She felt a sense of connection to a larger narrative of empowerment and justice. The cabin returned to a more peaceful rhythm, with passengers focusing on their own activities. She too allowed herself a moment to relax, though her mind remained alert. She understood that the challenge had not been about winning an argument, but about maintaining dignity and demonstrating strength in a difficult situation. Her calm composure had created a ripple of influence, showing that intelligence and courage could challenge unfair treatment effectively. She reflected on the significance of her own actions, recognizing that she had transformed a moment of potential shame into one of empowerment. The pilot's attempt to diminish her presence had failed, and she had asserted her dignity with clarity and strength. She understood that courage was not always about confrontation or aggression, but about calm, deliberate, and thoughtful action. Her response had not only defended her own rights, but also inspired those around her to recognize and value integrity and composure. As the plane continued its journey, she felt a quiet sense of accomplishment and reflection. The tension had shifted into admiration and understanding, and she had successfully navigated a challenging situation with intelligence and dignity. She realized that the power of her actions lay not in dramatic gestures, but in the deliberate choice to remain calm, clear, and composed. The ripple effect of her courage had already begun, and she felt a sense of fulfillment knowing that she had turned an uncomfortable moment into one of influence and empowerment. She allowed herself to consider the ways this experience might shape her future. She knew that facing challenges with composure and dignity could strengthen her confidence and inspire others to do the same. The lesson was clear. Courage was not just about standing up for oneself in the moment, but about creating an example that could have lasting impact. She felt a renewed sense of purpose, understanding that her actions could influence both immediate observers and a broader audience, who might later learn of her story. The passengers continued their journey, now with a sense of quiet respect and recognition. She felt the subtle but powerful change in the energy around her. What had begun as a moment of humiliation had transformed into a moment of empowerment, not only for herself, but for everyone who had witnessed it. She knew that her calm courage and thoughtful response had created a ripple effect, demonstrating the power of dignity and intelligence in the face of unfair treatment. The experience had changed her, leaving her with a sense of strength and purpose that would carry far beyond this flight. As the plane began its descent, she felt a mixture of relief and reflection. The journey had been long and tense, but it had transformed into something unexpected. The initial fear, humiliation, and uncertainty had turned into empowerment, clarity, and strength. She allowed herself to take a deep breath, letting the tension in her shoulders ease slightly. She knew that the coming moments would bring her back to the real world, but she also understood that this experience had changed her in ways that would last far beyond this flight. Passengers were quietly settling into their seats, preparing for landing. She noticed subtle expressions of admiration and respect, nods exchanged between strangers, and even a few smiles directed her way. She realized that the energy in the cabin had shifted completely from the initial tension to a shared acknowledgement of dignity and courage. It was a small but powerful moment, showing how one person's actions could influence an entire environment, creating a sense of community and awareness. She reflected on how she had handled the pilot's attempt to shame her. She had stayed calm, thoughtful, and deliberate, choosing her words carefully and asserting her dignity without resorting to anger. The experience had reminded her of the strength inherent in composure and intelligence. She realized that courage was not always loud or dramatic. Sometimes it was quiet, steady, and persistent. By maintaining her presence and asserting her rights calmly, she had not only defended herself, but also influenced the perceptions of those around her. Her thoughts drifted to the broader impact of the incident. She understood that in a world where public humiliation and discrimination could easily occur, moments like these were opportunities to model behavior and inspire others. Her actions had demonstrated that strength could be expressed through clarity, dignity, and calm assertiveness. She felt a sense of responsibility and hope, realizing that her response could encourage others to face challenges with similar poise and courage. As the plane descended, she noticed the pilot making a brief announcement over the intercom. The tone was more neutral now, lacking the earlier condescension. It occurred to her that her composed response had likely influenced him as well, challenging his assumptions and forcing him to reconsider his behavior. She did not feel the need for acknowledgement or apology. The subtle change in tone and demeanor was enough. Her goal had been to assert her dignity, and she had accomplished that with grace and intelligence. She looked around at the passengers once more, noticing the quiet impact of her actions. Some whispered among themselves, discussing the courage and calmness she had displayed. Others seemed reflective, perhaps considering how they might act in similar situations. She realized that her response had created ripples that extended far beyond herself. The simple act of standing firm with composure and clarity had transformed the environment, showing that courage could influence others in meaningful ways. The flight attendants passed by, offering assistance and smiles of acknowledgement. She returned their gestures with quiet nods, feeling a sense of connection and shared understanding. She understood that human interaction, even in subtle ways, could reinforce the importance of dignity and respect. These small affirmations reminded her that courage and composure were recognized and appreciated, even when unspoken. Her thoughts turned inward as she considered the lessons she had learned from the experience. She realized that life often presented unexpected challenges, moments that tested patience, integrity, and composure. By responding thoughtfully and calmly, she had maintained control over the situation and influenced others positively. She understood that true strength was not about overpowering others, but about upholding values, dignity, and intelligence, even when faced with intimidation or unfair treatment. As the plane touched down and began to taxi toward the gate, she felt a sense of closure. The tension of the earlier moments had dissipated, replaced by reflection and calm satisfaction. She thought about the ways this experience would stay with her, shaping her confidence and approach to challenges in the future. She understood that courage and composure were not just momentary reactions, but enduring qualities that could guide her through life. Passengers began gathering their belongings, preparing to disembark. She noticed subtle gestures of acknowledgement and respect, small signs that her actions had resonated. Some passengers offered quiet smiles or nods, and a few whispered to each other, perhaps sharing the story of what had occurred. She felt a sense of fulfillment, knowing that her composed response had left an impression and inspired reflection in those around her. She reflected on the broader societal implications of the incident. Public spaces, workplaces, and everyday interactions often involved challenges where individuals could face unfair treatment or judgment. Her experience showed that courage, dignity, and thoughtful action could transform such moments, creating awareness and influencing behavior. She felt a renewed sense of purpose, understanding that her actions could serve as an example and a source of inspiration for others facing similar situations. As the plane came to a complete stop and the seatbelt sign turned off, she prepared to leave her seat. She moved with calm determination, collecting her belongings while maintaining her composure. The experience had taught her that even small acts of courage could have lasting impact. She felt empowered, confident, and ready to continue her journey, carrying the lessons of resilience and dignity with her. Stepping onto the jet bridge, she took a moment to breathe in the fresh air and reflect on the journey. What had begun as a moment of potential humiliation had transformed into a powerful lesson in courage, composure, and influence. She understood that facing adversity with clarity and dignity not only preserved self-respect, but also inspired others to recognize the value of fairness and courage. The experience had become a defining moment, a story she could carry with pride and share as an example of strength in action. She thought about the pilot, passengers, and crew, recognizing that each person had witnessed the unfolding of courage in a moment that could have been purely negative. The transformation of the situation highlighted the power of human response, demonstrating that calm intelligence and dignity could overcome attempts at shame or intimidation. She felt a deep sense of satisfaction, knowing that she had reclaimed control of the moment and influenced those around her positively. Walking toward the exit, she felt a quiet pride in her actions. She knew that life would continue to present challenges, but the lessons learned on this flight would stay with her. She had demonstrated that courage was not always about confrontation, but about thoughtful, deliberate action that maintained dignity and integrity. Her response had created ripples of awareness, respect, and inspiration, leaving a lasting impact on the environment and the people who witnessed it. As she stepped off the plane and into the terminal, she allowed herself to smile quietly. She had faced an unexpected challenge, maintained her composure, and turned a potentially humiliating moment into one of empowerment and influence. The experience had changed her, reinforcing her belief in the power of dignity, courage, and thoughtful action. She felt ready to face the world, carrying the lessons of this flight as a source of strength and inspiration for the journey ahead.